When Pam Bondi walks onto the late-night stage just days after the death of Pope Francis, the audience expects something simple, a gentle interview with quiet reflections. But something's off from the start. The host tries to steer the night toward laughs, but Pam isn't following the script. The opening credits faded into applause as the studio lights steadied into their soft golden glow. A sleek primetime set, modern, polished, sterile, buzzed with quiet anticipation. The audience, curated and camera-ready, offered polite claps as the host strode confidently to center stage, notes in hand, grin sharp. Tonight, he beamed into the lens, we're joined by someone who knows Washington better than most. Legal powerhouse, former Florida Attorney General and White House defender, Pam Bondi. More applause. Not too loud, not too soft, just right. Pam entered from stage left, her signature calm stride unhurried. She wore a tailored navy blazer, hair immaculate, posture flawless. The crowd responded with a short wave of applause, respectful, curious. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The host greeted her with the usual charm, shaking her hand, ushering her to the plush chair across from him. Between them, 2 glasses of water, a stack of cue cards, and something else. A small black box, unlabeled, about the size of a jewelry case, glossy surface, sharp corners. It sat precisely in the center of the table, like it had always belonged there, yet didn't belong at all. The host didn't mention it, Pam didn't acknowledge it, but the camera caught it once, lingering half a second longer than needed. The host launched into his opener, voice rich with practiced enthusiasm. So, Pam, it's been a wild few months. Legal firestorms, political chess, and the whole country trying to interpret court filings like scripture. Tell us, how do you keep from losing your mind in the madness? A light chuckle rippled through the audience. Pam gave a polite smile, lips tightening just slightly. You learn to breathe through fire, she said, her voice low but steady. The host leaned in, still riding the rhythm. Well, that's why we love having you. You cut through the noise. So let's talk DOJ, let's talk indictments and... But she didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the box. Just a moment, barely perceptible. But it was enough. The host noticed. He hesitated, just a beat, then continued, You okay? Pam looked back at him, not evasive, not anxious, just still. And then the shift began. The host, sensing the pause, tried to recover with a grin. Unless that box has your next big case inside it, he joked, nodding toward it. We might have to subpoena the props department. A light laugh from the audience, but not from Pam. She didn't even blink. Instead, she turned slightly, her hand resting calmly on her lap, the other barely brushing the edge of the table. Her eyes locked on the black box for a moment longer. Then she looked at the host, not as a guest on a talk show, but as someone making a decision in real time. There's something I've been keeping, she said quietly, for years. The host straightened, his smile faltering. Pam? Her voice didn't rise, didn't dramatize, but it carried through the studio, through the silence, through the space between what they expected and what was about to unfold. It's time you know, she said. The room shifted. Audience members leaned forward slightly, sensing something real, something off script. The laughter died away, swallowed by a slow, creeping tension. The host blinked. No. What exactly? Pam didn't answer immediately. Her eyes returned to the black box. I agreed to do this interview because it's time, she said, but not for the reason people think. The host glanced at the crew. No signal from the producer, no interruption in the earpiece, just a heavy, waiting quiet. I thought I could keep it buried, she said, tucked away in silence. But that silence, it's cost me more than I can explain. The audience froze. Phones rose discreetly, despite the rules. I met him once, she added, in Rome, not as a tourist, not as a lawyer, just as a woman with a question. Who? The host asked, voice dropping instinctively. Pam turned to face the audience. Pope Francis. The host's eyes widened. You met him privately? She nodded. And he gave me that. She gestured to the box. The host stared at it now as if seeing it for the first time. What's in it? He asked, almost whispering. Pam looked at him, the light casting faint shadows under her eyes. A secret, she said, but not mine. Then, slowly, her hand moved toward the box, and the silence became something else entirely. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The host looked from Bondi to the black box and back again. She didn't flinch. The lights felt hotter, the room suddenly too still. She leaned in, voice calm, but threaded with something deeper. It was 7 years ago, Rome. I was attending a UN legal summit, nothing unusual. Panels on cross-border justice, corruption, trade laws. She paused. I was there as a legal expert, not as a believer. The host remained quiet. Even the audience had stopped shifting in their seats. I remember the moment because it wasn't part of the schedule. I just finished a panel on extradition ethics. One of the Vatican's envoys, plain black suit, small lapel cross, approached me. No introduction. He simply said, "His Holiness requests a moment of your time." She looked down briefly as if replaying the moment in her mind. At first, I thought it was a formality, a photo op, a symbolic handshake. She let out a breath, soft but measured. But they didn't take me through the main corridors. They led me through a service passage, narrow, cold, the kind of hallway that wasn't meant for guests. The host leaned forward now, his cue cards untouched. I was taken to a small room tucked behind a side chapel. No cameras, no ceremony, just a wooden chair, a lamp, and him. Pope Francis, the host asked, as if needing confirmation that this wasn't a metaphor. She nodded. He looked at me like he'd already been waiting, like he knew I'd come. What did he say? The host asked, his voice dropping again. Bondi took a moment before answering. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't bless me. He said only one thing. The room felt colder. He said, "The church is unraveling. I need a legal mind that understands silence." Gasps were stifled in the audience. Pam Bondi, who had built a career on law, not mysticism, not faith, sat in front of the most powerful religious figure in the world and was asked to listen. And that night, the law was no longer about order. It became a threshold. He didn't speak like a pope, Pam said, her voice low but unwavering. He spoke like a man who'd seen something that broke him. The host sat motionless, his usual banter gone. Even the studio crew, normally invisible behind the scenes, had stopped moving. I've interviewed world leaders, Pam continued, men hardened by war, women tempered by power, but I've never seen eyes like his. They weren't tired, they were hollowed out. What did he tell you? The host asked, voice cautious now, almost reverent. Pam looked at him, then at the audience, then at the black box on the table. He said the institution he led was no longer his. A low murmur rippled through the room. He told me, she continued, this isn't about salvation, it's about survival. The words landed like a stone in water, rippling outward, impossible to contain. He said the corruption wasn't just about money or abuse or politics. It was something deeper, something that had soaked into the very foundation of the church, and every time he tried to root it out, it multiplied. The host blinked, clearly shaken. Why you? He said he needed someone who understood truth from the outside, someone who could read between lines, not scripture, but silence. He said I had that ability. The silence deepened. He said the walls of the church echo louder than God, that the louder the voices inside became, the less truth they held. Pam looked down for a moment, her fingers tightening just slightly on the armrest. I wanted to leave. Honestly, I was overwhelmed. I felt out of place, like I'd stepped into something I had no business hearing. But you stayed, the host said, more a statement than a question. She nodded slowly. I stayed because of what he did next. The host waited, breath held. He reached into his robe and pulled out an envelope. She gestured to the black box. That envelope is inside that box, still sealed, still bearing the wax of the Vatican. The air in the studio thickened, as if the weight of those words had shifted the very air around them. And then Pam Bondi said quietly, "He told me if he didn't survive what was coming, I would know when to speak." She didn't hold it like a document. She held it like a confession. Pam Bondi looked down at the table, the black box between her and the host, now charged with something unspoken. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of a sealed past, finally stirring. He pulled it from his inner robe, wrapped in linen, sealed in red wax with the papal crest pressed so deep it looked like it bled. The audience leaned in, not for drama, but instinctively, like listeners at the edge of a warning. He held it out and said, "Open this only when silence becomes more dangerous than truth." Pam's hands were still as stone now, resting just inches from the box. The host had gone quiet, hands clasped, eyes locked on hers. He told me the church wasn't just suffering from scandal, it was infiltrated. Not by governments or greedy priests, but something worse, a fracture in faith. A quiet erosion that looked like piety on the outside, but was hollow at its core. The lights overhead felt sharper, more clinical now. He said there were voices inside the church, she continued, that no longer served God, that wore the cross not as a symbol of sacrifice, but as camouflage. The host opened his mouth, then closed it again. I asked him why me? Why not a cardinal? Why not someone inside? She paused, gaze fixed on something far beyond the studio walls. He said, "Because you haven't taken vows, you're still allowed to speak." And with that, he placed the envelope in her hands. She never opened it. Not after that meeting, not during the controversies, not even when the church's reputation shattered in the headlines. "I locked it away," Pam said, "in a safe, in my home, behind layers of steel and silence." And for 7 years, she kept it hidden, until now. She didn't believe in visions, she believed in precedent, in facts, evidence, cause and effect. But after Rome, something changed. "I started having a dream," Pam said, "and it wasn't like anything I'd had before." The audience remained silent, caught between the law and something older, deeper. "In the dream, I'm walking behind him, Pope Francis, but he isn't in robes. He's dressed in gray, like a penitent or a pilgrim. We're in a ruined place, a basilica maybe, but it's been shattered. The walls cracked, the floor broken into uneven stone." She looked distant now, eyes soft but unblinking. And as we walk, he speaks. But the words aren't prayers, they're legal maxims. Latin phrases I remember from law school, things like fiat justitia ruat caelum, let justice be done, though the heavens fall. The host didn't interrupt, no one did. But then, the words start changing. She took a slow breath. They start turning into scripture, familiar but strange, as if the law and the word were merging, and he tells me, clear as day, the law will not protect the light unless the light burns through it. A chill moved through the room, not from fear, from knowing. Pam continued, voice steady, but quieter now. "I wake up drenched in sweat every time. It's not just a dream, it's like a message I haven't finished reading." She paused, then looked directly at the host. "I haven't told anyone about that dream, not my staff, not my family, not even the priest I occasionally still call for counsel." "And why now?" the host asked, his voice almost reverent. She gestured to the box again. "Because the dream came again, last week, stronger than ever, and this time," he looked back at me, and he said, she hesitated. He said, "You know it's time." The host didn't move. The box didn't either. But the air around it did, because what she carried wasn't just evidence, it was ignition. The first message was almost nothing, An email without a sender, no subject, no signature, just a single sentence in the body. Truth has a price. Silence is cheaper. Pam Bondi had seen her share of threats, from courtroom enemies, from political machines, from the noise of media backlash. But this was different. It wasn't the kind of threat you report, she said, her voice even but heavier now. It was a signal, a whisper from someone who knew exactly what I'd been carrying. The host leaned back in his chair but said nothing. The audience had grown still, too still, phones forgotten in laps. No one dared blink too long. I dismissed it, Pam continued. At first, thought it might have been a random troll, a fluke, but then they kept coming. Another email, this time encrypted. Just a single word in the subject line. Domus, Latin, home. A few days later, a handwritten note appeared on her car windshield outside her Tallahassee office. Same pen, same slanted script. If it opens, it burns. Then I noticed the drones, she said. At first I thought they were media, paparazzi. But they hovered, low, silent, always at twilight. The host shifted, glancing toward the crew, but no one moved. The cameras rolled on. They knew where I lived, they knew where I worked, and somehow they knew I hadn't opened the envelope. She paused, letting the words settle in the silence. At that point, I didn't think it was random. I didn't think it was media. I thought maybe this was coming from inside the Vatican, or something worse. A rogue sect? The host asked, his voice low. Pam nodded once. Something they don't write about in scripture, but something that lives in its margins. A flicker of something, fear, conviction, crossed her face. Not everyone who wears a collar follows the same God, she said. And from that moment forward, she knew. The silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was containing something that wanted out. It arrived without warning. A small, matte black envelope slid beneath her office door before dawn. No return address, no markings. Just a thin flash drive inside, taped to a blank piece of paper. Pam sat alone when she opened it. No aides, no security. Just her and the screen. I didn't know what I was expecting, she said. Maybe another threat. Maybe some doctored clip meant to rattle me. She paused. But it wasn't fake. The host didn't speak. He knew better now. Pam looked out over the audience, then back to the box on the table, as if confirming it still held the weight it always had. I plugged it in, and what I saw. She trailed off, eyes darkening. It was grainy, low light, a stone chamber, no windows, 4 bishops sitting in a semicircle, their faces half covered in shadow. The only source of light was a single candle burning in the center of the room. The host furrowed his brow. Was it a confession? No, she said. A strategy session. The audience held their breath. They were speaking Latin, but the translation was embedded in the video, white text across the bottom of the frame. Someone wanted me to understand? Pam took a breath. They were discussing something they called the external voice. One of them said, if she speaks, the fracture deepens. Another said, she has American legal influence. That makes her dangerous. The host blinked. You think they were talking about you? Pam didn't hesitate. I know they were. She reached down beside her chair, pulling out a printed still from the video. She didn't show it to the camera, only the host. 2 of those men, I've seen them before, Vatican diplomats, public figures, but not like this, not in the dark, not whispering about me. Who sent the video? The host asked. Pam shook her head. No clue. The metadata was wiped. The drive itself burned out an hour after viewing. On its own? She nodded. It was built to vanish. The audience stirred, a subtle shift of disbelief colliding with something deeper, the sense that this wasn't the climax, it was the prelude, and whatever was hidden in that video wasn't the end of the secret. It was the beginning of a war. The studio lights dimmed slightly, barely noticeable, but enough to make the shadows settle deeper across the stage. Pam Bondi didn't move for a moment. Her eyes remained fixed on the black box in front of her, like it was breathing. The host didn't speak, neither did the audience. Then, with deliberate calm, she reached forward. Her fingers touched the lid. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. Her hand was steady, even as the world around her felt like it was holding its breath. "This," she said, her voice clear, "has been in my possession since the day he handed it to me." The host sat upright now, his hands folded tightly on the desk. Pam lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of worn black velvet, was the envelope, yellowed slightly with time. The wax seal, a deep blood-red circle marked with the papal crest, was still untouched, still whole. Even on camera, the audience could see its weight, not in grams or ounces, but in gravity. Pam reached in, gently lifting the envelope. She held it up for the audience to see. "I haven't opened it," she said, "not for 7 years. I've kept it sealed just as he asked." She looked directly into the lens now, not the host, not the audience. "But the threats haven't stopped, the dreams haven't faded, and the fear I felt has started to feel like guilt." She turned to the host now. "He told me to open it when silence became more dangerous than truth." A long pause. "I believe that moment is now." The audience didn't cheer, they didn't clap. They just watched, mouths slightly open, hearts thudding in anticipation. Pam looked down at the seal. Her thumb hovered near it. "If I open this," she said quietly, "it may end more than one career." She looked up again, voice firm. "But I have to." And with that, Pam Bondi placed the envelope flat on the table. Then, slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a silver letter opener, sleek, simple, engraved with a small cross on the handle. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching every motion as she pressed the blade beneath the wax and cut. The wax cracked with a quiet snap. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She peeled the flap open, slowly, reverently. The host leaned in slightly, his eyes darting between her hands and her face. The audience barely breathed. From inside, she pulled a single folded sheet of thick paper, Vatican stationery, cream-colored, edges slightly curled from age. She unfolded it, and then she read, "To the one outside the walls, who was never meant to carry this burden, but may be the last one left who can." Pam paused. The words were slanted, sharp, unmistakably handwritten. "This church, our church, has been hollowed not by unbelief, but by those who claim to believe too much. They move in silence, behind titles, behind robes. They are not heretics. They are architects of decay. They call themselves Luce Deserta." She looked up for a moment, letting the phrase hang. "The deserted light." The host blinked. "What is that? A faction?" Pam nodded slightly, eyes returning to the letter. "They are not revolutionaries. They are preservationists of power. They believe the church must evolve, not toward faith, but toward influence. They do not wish to destroy it. They wish to empty it and wear its skin." A shiver moved through the crowd. The host's lips parted, but no words came. They meet in shadow. They speak in Latin, and they choose voices from outside the Vatican to serve their ends. I have tried to confront them. I have failed. Every step forward has been swallowed by ceremony and secrets. Pam's voice grew quieter, but no less firm. "If I am gone when this reaches your hands, it is because they found a way to silence me. But truth cannot be buried forever. Light returns to every sanctuary eventually, even the deserted ones." Pam finished the letter. She folded it carefully and placed it beside the box. The host swallowed. "He was afraid." "No," she said. "He was surrounded." The audience sat in stillness, as if waiting for something else. But what came next wasn't louder. It was colder. Because Luce Deserta was no longer a warning, it was a name. And it was watching. Pam didn't close the envelope. Instead, she reached in again. Her hand moved slowly, fingertips brushing the inside, as if searching for something she already knew was there. The host sat forward, silent. The audience leaned in, not from curiosity, but gravity. They could feel the next truth arriving. She pulled out a second item, a folded sheet of parchment, aged, fragile, cornered with creases like it had been opened and closed 100 times before. Its edges were marked with a faint gold trim. At the top, the insignia of the Vatican, stamped in faded ink. This, she said, was beneath the letter. She unfolded it on the table with care, smoothing it flat. The host glanced down, his breath catching slightly. It was a map, but not of the world, not quite. This was something else, something older, scrawled in Latin, land masses bordered by water, but not named. Instead, the map bore 3 crimson circles, hand-drawn, bleeding slightly into the paper, one over Rome, one over Buenos Aires, Argentina, and one over a place in the United States. Montana, Pam pointed. I know what this is. The audience stilled again. These are vaults, archives maybe, places where the church keeps what it doesn't want found or seen. The Pope once said the worst truths aren't hidden behind walls, they're buried under tradition. She tapped Rome. This one's obvious. The Vatican Library has miles of underground shelves, most of them sealed to the public. She moved to Argentina. This could be personal. It's where he's from. Buenos Aires. Maybe it's where he first saw them, Luce Deserta. And this? The host asked, pointing to the U.S. circle. Pam looked at him. This, I don't know, but I think they brought something here, something they didn't want Europe to see. The host swallowed hard. You're saying the church is hiding pieces of something in 3 countries? Pam's answer came slowly. Not pieces. Proof. And suddenly the map on the table felt less like parchment and more like a blueprint for something unholy. The image flickered onto the screen behind them without warning. It wasn't planned. Pam hadn't signaled the crew, but someone backstage, perhaps prepped earlier, knew when to cue it. It was a photo, grainy, dusk-toned, taken from a strange angle, like the lens had been half concealed by shadow. It showed a courtyard, ancient columns, soft Vatican light pouring from overhead lamps. In the center, Pope Francis and Pam Bondi walking side by side, her head slightly lowered, his hand raised in mid-gesture. But that wasn't what made the room freeze. It was the figure in the background. Near the edge of the frame, just past the 3rd column, stood a shadow, cloaked, still, face obscured by the long, heavy hood, watching them, unmoving. Pam turned slowly toward the screen, not to explain it, but to confirm what everyone was already feeling. That photo wasn't taken by anyone on my team, she said. It arrived 3 months after our meeting. No note, no explanation. The host stared at the figure, his jaw tightening. Who took it? I don't know, Pam said, but it wasn't alone. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out 3 more photos, each encased in clear plastic. The first showed her at a public lecture in D.C., a rooftop visible behind her. In the far distance, the same cloaked silhouette. The second, outside a church in New Hampshire, snow falling, a dark form under the eaves. The third, taken from across the street, her home in Florida, curtains drawn. But the figure was there again, always at the edge, always distant, always watching. The host was visibly shaken. You think it's the same person? I think it's the same thing, Pam said, and I think they've been watching not just me, but anyone the Pope trusted. The audience shifted, unsettled. Someone in the 3rd row whispered, "Is it them?" Pam heard it. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked over to the photos and pointed to the shadow in the Vatican image. When we left that night, she said, I thought it was just the 2 of us, but it wasn't. She looked back at the camera, and I don't think it ever was. The tension was no longer subtle. It clung to the air like static, an unseen voltage humming beneath the studio lights. The photos still sat on the table. The map lay unfolded beside them. The Pope's letter, its words now burned into the minds of the audience, rested like a sacred curse between Pam and the host. Then it happened. Pam's phone, screen down beside her water glass, buzzed. Not once, not twice. 3 times. She didn't move at first, but then slowly, she turned it over. The screen lit up. No caller ID, no app notification, just a single text message. She read it silently. Her eyes didn't widen, her breath didn't quicken. But her mouth tightened, jaw steeling with familiar resolve. The host leaned in. "Pam, everything okay?" She turned the phone toward him. The screen showed one line, glowing white against black. "Do not finish this. The law cannot shield fire." A hush fell instantly. The host took the phone in shaking hands and read the message aloud. The audience gasped. The crew behind the cameras stopped moving. One of them instinctively stepped back, as if the message itself might burn through the glass. The host looked up. "Pam, this just came in? Now?" She nodded. "Do you think it's real?" "I think it's desperate," she said. Then, louder, turning toward the audience, she repeated the words, this time with steel in her spine. "The law only works if we use it. I won't be intimidated." The words landed like a gavel strike. She placed the phone down, screen up, threat visible, and folded her hands in front of her. "Whoever sent that," she said, "thinks fear is leverage." Her gaze sharpened. "They've miscalculated." The host's face was pale now, his words careful. "Pam, you realize what this means. You've just read a private letter from the Pope. You've named a faction inside the church. You've received a live threat, on air." Pam didn't blink. "I realize exactly what it means." He hesitated. "You could lose your security clearance, your legal license, your political future." "I could lose more than that," she replied. The weight of the moment pressed hard now. The audience wasn't just watching a broadcast anymore. They were watching a line being crossed, and no one knew what lay on the other side. "I may be followed after tonight. I may be audited, watched, silenced." A beat passed. "But I didn't swear to protect power," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't have to. "I swore to protect justice." The host leaned back, stunned. "What are you going to do?" Pam reached for the folder again, pulling out a copy of the Pope's letter, already scanned and watermarked. "I'm going to release this," she said, "not just to the press, but to the public, internationally, every outlet, every language. No more backrooms, no more sealed vaults." "You'll be sued." "Let them sue me." The camera slowly panned the studio. "I'm also sharing the video," she added. "The flash drive may be gone, but I copied it. The faces, the voices, the words. She has American legal influence." The host sat frozen. This is global." "No," she said, eyes locked on his. "This is human." She turned to the camera one last time. "If I disappear after tonight, remember this wasn't about me. This was about a light they thought they could desert." She tapped the letter gently. "And now that light is awake." The lights overhead seemed softer now, dimmed not by design, but by the gravity of what had just passed. The map was still spread across the table. The photos lay exposed. The threats had been spoken aloud. The letter read. The secrets released. There was nothing left to hide. And yet, everything still felt unfinished. Pam Bondi sat with the steadiness of someone who had made peace with consequences. Before her, the black box stood open like a vault unsealed. She reached forward once more, lifting the Pope's letter with the same reverence she had opened it. Her fingers brushed its edge as if memorizing the weight, the texture, the truth it carried. She placed the folded letter back inside the box, not to bury it, but to mark it. "To the man who trusted me," she said quietly, her words not rehearsed, but resolute. "I've done what you asked. I spoke." The host didn't respond. He no longer played the part of host. He was simply a witness now, like everyone else. Pam looked up. first to the crowd, then finally to the camera. "If faith has any hope left," she said, her voice clear and low, "it will not come from silence." She paused. The entire world in that breath leaned closer. "It will come from someone willing to speak." And then a sound from backstage, sharp, sudden, like something heavy falling, metal clashing, a voice distant, muffled, urgent. The audience flinched. A few turned their heads. A ripple of alarm passed through the studio. The host instinctively looked to the side, his earpiece crackling, but no words came through. Pam didn't turn. She stayed still, eyes forward, hands folded, truth already spoken. Another sound, closer this time. A door, a bang, shouts. The kind that don't belong in any studio. And then the broadcast cut. The screen flickered to black. No credits, no music, no outro. Just silence. But not the kind that hides, the kind that waits. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.